I was blown away by Disney's robot Judy Hopps that was jumping around and falling around and rolling around on stage a few months ago. But then these three little guys show up in Star Wars land, and I have to give credit where credit is due. These are the most interesting animated robots I have ever seen. The second I saw this video, I knew I wanted to make a video about how they do this. Like, how does Disney make such realistic robots? The robots that you're looking at are not remote controlled, they're not puppeteered, they're actually expressing animations in the real world through a robotic exoskeleton. And it's no secret, I grew up being like a big Disney fan. We went there like every year when I was growing up with my family. And as I became too old to like enjoy Disneyland like a kid does, I found myself really fascinated with the way that the company creates experiences, and their robotics have been one of my main interests. And now looking at these cool new little Star Wars robots, these are like the most emotive and emotional and like animated robots I have ever seen. So now let's rewind time a little bit and say, how did Disney get to this kind of a robot before anybody else? Now later in the video, I want to show you how the company built a completely new pipeline for animating real robots. Basically getting a personality in a system, something like a Pixar movie, and then taking that character and what that character should be like and putting it into a physical form. But first, I want to show you where Disney Robotics was a number of years ago and talk a little bit about how we got to this point. Because for most of Disney's history, when you thought about animatronics, you wouldn't even really call them like robots, you would just call them basically pistons with joints, and then they're masked, they're kind of puppeted, they're covered. Like under the prosthetics and the hair and the makeup and the clothes, these are actuators and pistons, and they're programmed in patterns. Which means if you want a more realistic animatronic, you're doing all sorts of things. It's like the prosthetics on the front end to see how human you can make it, but for the movement, it's about adding more and more actuators, making them tinier, making them smaller, and then remember, each actuator that you add now is something else that needs to be manually programmed. You have to have an actual programmer go in there and say, move this one so many degrees at the same time as this one so many degrees, and plan out how you want the character to move. This is the big difference between programming something and using artificial intelligence. No matter how complex a program is, it's still line by line readable. It's logic all the way through. So of course, then if you want to actually make a more complicated robot, then you just need more complicated code and smaller pistons and just basically a bigger budget. And that's why we end up with like a range of animatronics. On the low end, you get the Chuck E. Cheese kind of like broken down half the time, sort of slightly moving banjo type things, or even early versions of like Pirates of the Caribbean, where they were kind of elaborate sets, but they were simple. A lot of the things were simple circles moving around, or they were just basic head movements, one or two actuators to give it a little bit of movement, and then something really kind of weird with the jaw up and down. But as Disney got bigger budgets and they got better at actually designing the hardware and they got more serious about making things, they have gotten good at that old school type of building also. For example, the Amazing Shaman, which is that big animatronic that you find, it's a Na'vi that's at the end of Navi's River in Pandora Land. For its time, that was considered the most advanced animatronic in the world. Thousands of pivot points, tens of thousands of lines of code to run it. And it did a pretty good job. I mean, these are fairly realistic movements. I mean, they're better than what we're seeing out of the Tesla Optimus robot right now. So I would call that, especially for something that's 3 or 4 years old now. Another good example of this is if you look at the robotic version of Jack Sparrow that's in the original Pirates of the Caribbean, the one in Disneyland, because originally Disneyland, you know, when they built that ride, it was not the same era, it was not the same kind of budget. But then when the movies came out, they had needing such a revamp of the ride that the next Jack Sparrow has so much more dynamic movement. It looks much more like Leonardo DiCaprio and all that stuff. And you can see from these examples the noticeable improvement in the grace and the fluidity, especially the way that the Jack Sparrow portrayed in the movies had that like sort of drunken swagger or whatever. Like, they built that in pretty well. But robots after artificial intelligence are a completely different story, and we're never going to manually match that. That's why the Tesla self-driving car is going end-to-end AI, because even though they have they might even have millions of lines, or at least hundreds of thousands of lines that drove the Tesla, they're throwing that away for end-to-end AI. So it's no surprise to me that we're going to see huge advancements in robotics at Disney also. But the difference is Disney understands character animation. There's just really not the same kind of people at like 1X, which is OpenAI's robotic company, or at Tesla or at Google, who just have that built-in sense of how to deliver emotions to the audience. And Disney is absolutely starting to hit their stride with this second generation of AI robots. Now, I would say, at least from the consumer point of view, it was about 7 months ago when Judy Hopps showed up at one of the Disney events that I first thought, wow, this is different. Falling out of the box like that and actually not being tethered to anything and being on roller skates, there's something sort of magical starting. You can kind of feel it when you watch the demo. And then a few months later, when Baby Groot showed up, I think I should have been like, oh, this is big deal. I never made a video on that Groot thing, but look at how realistic this is too. This is really a nice step forward for just 3 or 4 months. Like the shoulder movements and the blinking and sort of the head nods, like there's definitely something that you can imagine not being programmed, but sort of simulated. Some kind of artificial intelligence that's learning how Groot should move and implementing that into that robot. And even though I should have seen it earlier, now I'm starting to get my head around just how quick this is happening and the advantage that Disney has from building animation into their new pipeline. And you can see it in these little Star Wars robots. And you know what? They're not just going on stage anymore and doing a quick demo and then being taken to the back. These robots were in Disneyland. These are real guests that are gathered around them. They are being monitored still. They're still sort of in a beta or a test phase, but they're out there right now interacting with guests, and that's all learning data for the next round. So this thing is now, in a cycle. And lucky for Disney, they have this long history of actually building animatronics. So they have been building smaller and smaller actuators, better and better pistons, more reliable hardware. And I'm sure there's something about building a code base to control all those things and having something like Pixar, where they have these massive simulations and these great ways of animating characters that can sort of come together and say, here is how we control this robot. Here is what the right animation looks like. Then put the artificial intelligence in between there and let it kind of figure out when to move things so that you get a realistic outcome. And then leverage how Disney has facilities and partnerships and maintenance teams galore to help facilitate this. And I do suspect that with Tesla having the Dojo supercomputer, the neural network, that we'll see Optimus become very human, very capable, very helpful soon. Boston Robotics obviously has made interesting looking machines incredibly agile and quick and swift. So they have something else that's really impressive. But when your client is a utility, right? Like these companies are trying to build humans to help replace the workforce. This is about stocking shelves and building things and like doing work for people. Disney is about having an emotional connection, and I don't see anybody else leading the industry that way. And now that these robots have sensors on them, like the outside of a car can actually learn how to drive by seeing its environment, these robots are now interacting in a park setting where they're seeing humans interact with them, and they can take that data, bring it back and train it so that they become ultra relatable. And remember, once you have a neural net trained, you could drop that into a lot of different form factors, which means Disney's new pipeline can enable all sorts of interesting robotics to roam around Disneyland in the future. Like boom, you want an interesting idea? Go to Disneyland, replace that old broken gas-powered Autopia with a new Cars ride, start putting this kind of thing in each of the cars so that they're like animated and talking to the guests, and like you feel like you're going for a ride inside one of the cars. I mean, in Harry Potter world, like the paintings and the wands, all that stuff might spring to life in future iterations of theme parks. Because now Disney has the kind of software that you could call it simulation software, because that's what it is partially. And also keep in mind that what it can be learning doesn't always have to be real data. Like it certainly should be and can be, but that can be augmented with simulations. And you simulate that body shape, and you make it so that that body shape moves based on the exact actuators that you're going to be putting it in, so that in simulation it has the same restrictions that it would in real life. Then you drop it into a scenario, it can learn from that scenario, and that scenario can play out millions or trillions of times. So this robot, maybe the first time that it walks around Disneyland, it's already seen like thousands and thousands and thousands of kids doing all sorts of unpredictable stuff in the virtual simulation first. Kicked over, dumped candy on it, maybe parents are scared, or something worse, it falls in the water. I don't know, like all the things that you could imagine simulating. You might as well just throw a bunch of crap at it. Maybe just a bunch of objects, see how it handles it, in a sense, like mess with it in a whole bunch of ways. And then when it's doing the wrong thing, teach it what it should do. So when it goes out there the first time, it's way more capable than you'd expect, right? This is all part of reinforcement learning. It's all about learning from data. In the same way ChatGPT used to say a bunch of stuff that was sort of like, I don't think that's a good corporate vibe for us. So they said, and next time you do this, don't act this way, don't act this way, do act this way, do act this way. And as you just keep punching around, thumb up, thumb down, ChatGPT is getting better and better at saying the right kind of things. Disney's gonna wanna take that to the extreme before its robots are out there chatting with people. And when the few times it goes wrong and it becomes like a big viral thing, then they can go back and correct it. So over time, you'll see it become, a perfect Disney character. Like if it's supposed to act like, Pinocchio or Mickey Mouse or whatever, then like keep training it thumbs up when it's acting like Mickey Mouse. Thumbs down when it says something that's like, that's probably not what Mickey Mouse would say. So look, let's dive into this pipeline a little bit because this is the thing Disney seems to have that nobody else has right now. Okay, so when Disney Research a few days ago actually revealed this new Star Wars robot. With its highly animated head, its wiggly antennae that kind of seem like ears that get excited and go down, and the notable emotional gait, like it walks, it stumbles, it curls, like it does a lot of things that make you feel like it's either excited or happy or sad or nervous. This brings the robot to a new dimension of animatronics. And the team that built this is led by a guy named Moritz Botcher. Believe it or not, the way this robot was actually built was through a 3D printer and module hardware. Yeah, so to communicate this like vast array of emotions and all these like animated kind of over-exaggerated things, they didn't actually need to build incredibly different hardware. They just had to push it at the right sort of speed and orientation and kind of instinctive movements to make us feel that way. And the big tweak, the thing that you really have to give Disney credit for is most of the time when you train a system like this, you say, here's what your goal is, right? If it's gonna be in the kitchen, what you're saying is like, figure out how to get the dishes from the sink cleaned off and then into the dishwasher. That's your goal. That's the kind of thing that you would train an AI for. But Disney didn't have that goal because this really isn't a mass market product. This isn't something that goes into your house. This is something that's meant to entertain. So the goal was to entertain. More specifically, the goal was to become the character that it was supposed to be. Every Tesla humanoid robot is going to have the goal of helping you do something like dishes. But the one design that's supposed to look like Baby Groot is supposed to get closer and closer and closer to acting like Baby Groot would. Therefore, what it's trying to do is look at all of the movies that Baby Groot's ever been in, all of the different stories that Disney's written about it, the way he talks, it's trying to get closer and closer to that character, a fictional character. Its objective function is to bring a fictional character to life. Just blew my mind. You know what I mean? Like, what an objective function. I've never seen anything quite like that. And especially to see it in the real world before I even clicked that it was possible, I just was really excited. And I can only imagine the kind of advantage Disney might have if, they go into their Pixar studios and they say, all right, I've got this Buzz Lightyear character or whatever. Let's go look at the way we animated him in all 4 of the movies. Like, how did he move? How did it work? From there, let's go build the actuators that would give him the right kind of movement. So maybe they could even figure out a way to go the other route where it's like a true 3-dimensional character. Then here's what the design should be to make it optimized so I can move in a way that would be like this character, build the thing, then reverse it and say, now this character is basically like locked down into these exact movements, then go do the same thing that you've done in all the other movies, and all of a sudden you've got this feedback cycle. And part of Disney's new pipeline is a reinforcement. Reinforcement learning is part of what's making this little Star Wars robot so realistic right now. So the first step is the creative insight in the animator. That's the first thing that goes into this neural network. Then the robot makes the movement, and the signal of how well it did is based on whether or not those animators feel the emotion that they expected. Like, even though this is physical, just for reference, imagine going to ChatGPT and say, give me a sad poem, and then you read 2 of them and say, this one's better, this one's worse. Now give me 2 more. This one's better, this one's worse. Give me 2 more. This one's better, this one's worse. And it's trying and figuring out and learning from its mistakes. So the same character say, give me something that expresses excitement, and then it does it twice, and you say, oh, that one's better than that one. That one's better than that one. And it gets more and more good at making something that seems exciting to us by itself. That's what it's learning. Now, according to the official Disney Imagineering website, they run this on a single PC, so it sounds like a single GPU can run this thing also. So maybe like the training data obviously is a bigger thing, but once you have that neural network and you put it down into something small that can be brought down into the size of these tiny little robots, maybe in the future we'll have like thumb drive style. God, maybe you'll have a little Tinkerbell or something if you can actually get the compute that small and it's really not that big of a deal to run. So who knows where we're going. And then the other fact that off-the-shelf actuators are inside of 3D printed components means that the form factor is just digital too. Like, maybe that's another aspect where you can say, I know we can't really change the bones and the wrist movements and things like that completely, but here's how the shape looks. Now, layer on top of it anything. Like, it could look, like a samurai warrior, or it could look like a little robot, or it could be something cute because you plan to put fur on it. Like, it's 3D printed, so you can just print out another one. You can make some adjustments on the fly. So I'm telling you that OpenAI's robot division, 1X, the Boston Dynamics team, Tesla's Optimus division, Google Robotics, they all need to take note of what Disney has done here. Honestly, I would prefer if these companies figured out how to get that emotional resonance with us before they started using it to like replace all our jobs, so we're not just freaked out the whole time. And of course, there's plenty of money to be made if your goal is to like replace our entire GDP of labor with robots. Like, that's obviously going to make those companies super rich, so I understand why they didn't go the route Disney did. But I would have to wonder, I mean, if I was the CEO of Disney, I would at least look into this. I would definitely tell somebody to research it, but I would seriously think about whether or not Disney should probably get into the game of building a factory and trying to think about how they could build robotics for the mass consumption, for all of us. I mean, who doesn't want like a BB-8 or an R2-D2 in the back of their Tesla or something that rolls around with you when you're shopping at the grocery store? Like, on the software side, it would scale. Disney's big enough to like put together some big factories and start mass producing this stuff, or at least take their IP and all of this interesting character development they've done and like get it into the hands of someone else who could help them like really do it right. But even if it just ends up at the park, it's gonna be reason enough for me to go visit Disneyland. So sprinkle some Disney magic on that subscribe button, help me get to my next goal, 8,000 subs. Thanks. Oh, and guess what? Doug is my very first Patreon subscriber. So this is awesome. Like, I actually have a Patreon and, you know, I'm working my way to 8,000 subs. Maybe I'm gonna make a living out of this. Like, you know, here's for hoping.